In this episode of Stuff I Like to Do, I'm going to cover some exercises that I do as far as strength and conditioning to really condition my body for whenever I'm doing any kind of striking. And I apologize for the noise in the background, but it's like 15 degrees outside my house, so I got to have the heater on. But these are things that I do. I don't do them always. I try to space them out because there's a lot of wear and tear sometimes when you're doing this stuff. But these are exercises I learned from Grandmaster Perkins and also Grandmaster Karen. And there's just so much stuff that they did to really help people develop their bodies. So I thought what I would do is share some of this with you, because this is stuff that I get hit for on questions all the time by folks. So hopefully you can get something out of this and enjoy. So the first exercise I'm going to cover is something that deals with balance. As Grandmaster Perkins used to always talk about it, balance, balance, balance. But it wasn't just balance for the sake of balance. It was really equilibrium control. He had tremendous control over his equilibrium, and so what you're trying to do is you're trying to develop functional balance. And that's really what he was talking about. He wasn't talking about being like a tightrope walker or something like that. I'm not saying that that's an easy thing, but it's different when you have to move with a person who's not cooperating with you and you don't have a nice smooth flat floor like I got here. So one of the things that Grandmaster Karen showed me that he learned from Grandmaster Perkins was kind of an isometric type of exercise for your legs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand kind of in the L stance. You can do it in different stances. I'm going to start off in the L stance. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually push, and I'll exaggerate my position, from the instep of my feet. And what I'm doing is I'm going to push in an outward manner. So I'm going to bend my knees, sink a little bit so I can get some leverage, and I'm just going to push. And then I'm going to hold it there, for 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds, whatever I feel I need to do. And where you want to feel this, you should be feeling this not only in the inside of your leg, but you also should be feeling it in your hip flexors and your glutes as you're pushing. And you want to try to remain as upright as possible. And then once I've done that a little bit for whatever amount of time, I switch sides. I'm just switching sides. You can see I'm switching sides. I switch the foot position and I do it the other way. And what I'm doing again is I'm sinking down and I'm pushing. You can kind of see my knees going inward a little bit, and I'm pushing outward. And what I'm doing here is I'm developing the kind of stability that if you ever work with Grandmaster Karen, it makes me laugh. The guy had a root like an oak tree. I mean, he didn't want to move. You were not moving him. The only person that I ever saw who could make him back up, though, was Grandmaster Perkins. So that tells you a lot about John's ability, okay? Because he's the only person I ever saw who could make Tim back up. I'm not saying Tim never stepped with people. I'm just saying if he didn't want to move, you weren't moving him unless you were Grandmaster Perkins. So, that tells you a lot about John. And so he had this root that if you pushed against him, literally you felt like you were pushing against a tree. And then when he picked his feet up, if he had to move, you felt like you were being pushed, by a plow or something like that. The other thing he would do then is, using the same position, he actually would force downward and he would try to pull his feet inward. So what I'm doing here is, instead of pushing outward, I'm now using relatively the same position. I'm pulling inward. And I do that for, whatever, 15, 20 seconds, whatever I feel I need to do. And then I kind of like switch, and then I do the same thing. I'm pulling inward. Now, when I'm doing this, I'm trying to keep the majority of the force kind of on the instep and not really on the outer part of the foot. And some people disagree with that. The reason for that is, what I'm trying to do is, I'm just trying to keep as much of the alignment within my joints as possible. And I'm also training myself to not roll my feet outward. I'm not saying that, when your feet are doing stuff like this, there isn't a way to strengthen it. But I'm not trying to do that, because when you're moving back and forth, or you have to shuffle just like a boxer, that's really how your feet are moving. You're not on the outer part of your feet, and you're not just solely on your heels. So it's kind of like this springiness that you get. So when I say on the balls of your feet, it's a relative term. It doesn't have to be exact. The other thing I do that he showed me was, then I'm going to push on this leg as if I want to go in this direction, and I'm going to push on this foot inward as if I'm trying to go in this direction. So this one's kind of going here, pushing in this direction. This foot is kind of almost like I'm pulling the ground toward me, and I'm just trying to get that feel. And I can feel even my toes kind of grabbing the ground, and then I do the same thing the other way. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of getting that sensation you have, just like if you've ever ran track or you're getting ready to race your friend, and you can feel yourself almost on the balls of your feet or the edge of your toes, as if you're getting ready to pull yourself in that direction. And what that does is, by developing that, that's what gives me that ability to push from the root and even pull and snap myself into position. So if I'm moving on someone and I have to hit, what I'm doing is I'm pushing, but I'm also kind of gripping the ground and making sure that I'm pulling myself forward and I'm not sliding my feet or doing something where I'm going to trip over my own feet. So those are just some things you can do to help really build some of that kind of strength in your legs. I mean, there are other things you can do, but this is just an idea. You can also stand square and just push outward and kind of do the same thing. My only suggestion is when you're doing that, just bear in mind that, there's still a lot of force. So you want to I always tell people, about 3/4 effort. Some people say, well, why not full force? Well, the problem with isometrics is you really don't know what 100% force is. It's a feel thing. And because you're forcing with a lot of force, what you're trying not to do is stress that muscle to the point where you actually start tearing muscles or you start straining tendons. The purpose is to build you up, not to break you up. And the next part of this, I'm going to cover some of the upper body stuff that my masters taught me that I still do to this day. And, shame on me for not showing more of this stuff to people.